this goes. Hey everybody, coming to you from another hotel room, this time in New Orleans. Well, actually, I guess it's not technically New Orleans, but New Orleans Metro. These are, I don't have a lot of pictures. Pardon me, we're still waiting to get more multimedia, but NASA just issued a press release with this image. It looks like they've tweaked the coloring. I'm trying to. I guess it looked like that kind of. I don't know. I was so busy just trying to get pictures and running around talking to people. But there's 3 pictures that NASA's released relatively recently. This is a shot from a drone, and then there was, I believe it was a Coast Guard helicopter made a couple of swings around this morning. So the stage a little bit different of just the way things went from 2 years ago when the second fully completed core stage, which just launched on Artemis II a couple of weeks ago, rolled out from pretty much the same place. So let me just go ahead and cycle through those. So this was a picture from a drone. I'm not sure where this is. I haven't had a chance to take a long look at it. We basically said goodbye to the stage. We got to see it come out of the facility grounds and make a left onto one of the 2 turns that it needs to make. So this might actually be on kind of on the straightaway towards the barge, and then this is the last picture that I saw, and I'm sure there will be others, but this is a nice shot from onboard Pegasus, looking towards the opening where it's the top 4/5 of the stage are headed towards the barge, and so you can see here. This is it's basically the propellant tanks and I don't know, maybe half of the avionics. So this is still more than a shuttle external tank. Not completely finished, but a significant part of the way. And then for transportation purposes, you can see over here. This is something that I talked about last year when we finally got some pictures of it, and basically they were able to repurpose the engine section structural test article for this purpose. It was in structural testing. They took the 2 propellant tanks to failure, so those were no longer really propellant tanks at that point, but I don't know that I don't know if they overstressed the inner tank structure, or if they did this one, they didn't destroy it to the point where it couldn't stand in for the transportation purposes here. So basically, what they needed something that fits on this rear transportation carrier. And so it has basically all of the structural elements of the engine section, but it has no propulsion systems, no avionics, no wiring, no engines, of course, and but that's not necessary for transportation. So these are the 3 so far. I'm sure there will be others on images.nasa.gov. And then looking at, these are the pictures that I got, and not all of them, but just kind of running through this just to get just some representative pictures. Actually, interestingly, if you, whoops, all right, I'm already cheating. Uh, this picture here. So one of the things that they're not going to talk about now is the now canceled exploration upper stage, and you can see in this picture one in the opening here they had some hardware that they were still working on, and of course they've stopped work on that now, and they'll have to, at some point they will have to they will have to clear that out of there, because they will it's going to be a while, but they will, when they make the fourth one of these articles, they'll need that cell again. Actually, they'll need it earlier than that, but that's something I think, in the name of schedule for this unit for Artemis III, they accelerated the schedule, and I think now that this is on its way to Florida, probably either tomorrow or relatively soon. And they're still citing the same sort of 7 to 10 days, and fingers crossed. I think we're going to get, obviously when it gets to the Kennedy Space Center turn base and Pegasus, the NSF NASA Spaceflight Now, the permanent press there at the press site will be covering it, but I believe we may also get a NASA live stream, and if so, then I can do another one of those. We did a live stream not that long ago, just end of last week, when the mobile launcher rolled back into the VAB. So if they give us something there live, then whenever that is, then that's we can do another one of those. So, but you can kind of see it in here, I suppose, if you blow this up. But this is, of course, just a nice aerial view of the area, and in fact, this is the tornado that went through the facility kind of went through at this angle. But of course, the thing is, it was I think it was a quarter of a mile wide. Of course, multi-vortex tornado, but it just, again, it still kind of blows my mind when I'm standing there that that an EF3 tornado came through there. But so these are pictures down on the tarmac. They had the difference between 2 years ago and today, and just in terms of the rollout and being able to get things, is the for Core Stage 2, it was in July and they were rolling out in the morning, but they were worried about something I was reminded of today, and it's possible I may have heard back then and forgot, but they basically, like 2 years ago, they spun that core stage around and they took off, and they didn't wait for anybody. A couple of the Artemis II astronauts were there. I know it was Reed Weissman, and I believe it was Jeremy Hansen. Actually, no, it may have been Victor Glover. But they had a flyover with I think F-15s, and it's, by the time the flyover occurred, the stage had already turned the corner, and we tried to chase it down, but it was already more than halfway to the barge by the time we caught up with it. And so that was because of a weather issue. Today they had one of the SPMTs was a little flaky for a little while, so it hung around, and then we also got a chance to chase it a little bit. They were going a little slower today, basically, so we got a chance at least to chase it around one corner and get outside in front of it when it came out of the gate. And so this is just a couple more shots of maybe not dignitaries. I think this is after there were some remarks by NASA leadership, and then after that there were a lot of pictures, and this was just getting the stage spun around. And now, again, I'll have more pictures later after I get a chance to go through go through this. But now this is what we got a chance to do today, which was to come outside the gates and at least catch it making this first turn onto, can't remember if this is Venus or Saturn, but it turns left here, and then it makes a right about another maybe eighth of a mile down the road. And so I did it again. Or no, maybe not. Maybe that was it. Well, so there's I guess I can go ahead and come over to the videos. So this is just a little bit of video of them turning the stage around, spinning it out. So they back the back end out. They back it kind of all the way up to the fence, and then because they have the ability to make hard turns, they have I can't remember, I think it's 3 degrees of freedom, but in each of these SPMTs, it's like there's 2 SPMTs under the forward hiss, so to speak. I think it's just, again, these generic acronyms, hardware interface structure, but this is these carriers are picked up by the SPMTs. So a pair here and a pair in the back. So they back it out, and then they swing the front part forward, and they sort of start to turn both of them in tandem. And then they basically got it all swung all the way around, and then at this point it becomes a little bit more of a just a drive. So they turning left onto this first drive, and I'm just kind of skipping ahead here, but just we were kind of allowed to walk in this sort of grassy area on the other side, and this is just kind of just looking at some of the folks that were taking pictures. And then the move team is the one that's got the safety vests on, and you can see the SPMT, I think one of the SPMT drivers, and then let me see if I can pause it. So it's kind of hard to tell, but up here past the trees, but this is building 451, which is where they do the pneumatic proof test on hydrogen tanks. That's actually farther beyond the road that they do, but they basically come down this road, and then they hang a right, and then that road basically goes down, and it winds over a little bit of a hill down towards the dock where Pegasus is. And so we got maybe 20 minutes or so. But this was actually, what was cool about this, which is more like the first core stage rollout, is we got a chance to get a little closer to the stage here. So it's like at some point it just gets low. The front end of it, the front end of it kind of hangs out over the street. And then just walking just a little bit of this, and I'll do some more. It was windy. A cold front just came through here, so it went from 85 and muggy, which is this is sort of a typical spring pattern, and then once the cold front came through, it was a little chilly with the wind today, a little windy. It actually got a little bit windier during the morning. So you can see a little bit of that on the weather cover. So, okay. And so then after that they kept going. That was kind of where we left the stage, and we're starting to get some pictures from NASA, from Marshall Space Flight Center, and the Michoud imagery team followed it down to the barge, and they're probably documenting getting it getting it bolted and welded down to the barge deck. And while that was going on, actually, well, there were a number of tours inside the facility, so you can see the western edge of Building 103 in the background here. Building 110 is the vertical assembly building, so it's their VAB, and then there's another one which is not visible from here, pardon me, which is Building 115 on the east end of the complex. And we ended up getting all the way over there during the tour, and that's where we went after. I think we were I think after the social media folks. And I've seen a couple of, there's a good, one of them posted a good question to Dr. Lori Glaze about the question being, what upper stage will Artemis III use, if any? No answer yet, but she said maybe they will, they're getting closer to deciding. I think the sort of, it's still baselined as using the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, just like they did on Artemis II. So we'll see if they come off of that. It's possible that they're just going to stick with that, which would mean that they have to use Centaur 5 on Artemis 4 and Artemis 5. So then we got a tour. This is Building 115. So this is the vertical weld center. These are I believe, all 8 panels of the one of the barrels of the liquid hydrogen tank for core stage 5. I believe Greg said it was barrel number 4. So they've welded 3 of the 5 LH2 tank barrels for the 5th core stage. This will be the 4th. They'll load these panels into the tool. What he said that they do is they and I forget the word they call them, but basically the Building 115 has some environmental controls, and so they move the panels from Building 103 into this building to sort of let the temperatures let the temperatures equalize in the panels before they load them in the tool and begin the friction stir welding. And so, interestingly, so you can see, not very well in this shot, but in the background here you can see one of the exploration upper stage weld tools. And I believe behind these, these structures are used for testing, for doing proof load testing for some of the other ground support equipment. But in the background with the stairs, you can see, I believe that was going to be the final assembly tool that was going to be used for EUS. So I'm not sure what they're going to do with that now. Similarly with all of the other tooling that they use now. There a lot of the tooling that they use for exploration upper stage, or used for exploration upper stage, it was they're using the same tools that core stage uses for that, so they're still using most of those tools. It's just now they're only continuing to use the core stage tools. So then this is a shot inside Lockheed Martin's little, it's not that little, but relatively speaking, it's a smaller work area within the Building 103 complex where they build and assemble some of the structures for Orion. And so in this shot, you can see the spacecraft adapter cone for Artemis 4 over here, and they just delivered the SA cone for Artemis 5. and they were beginning to they were working on the third of 3 spacecraft adapter jettison panels. So if you recall, during the Artemis II launch, after the solid rocket boosters separate, which is a little bit after 2 minutes of flight, around 3 minutes 15 seconds or so, those 3 panels that surround the service module are released. Those are called the spacecraft adapter jettison panels, or SAJ panels. So they're working on those. They're also working on the ogive panels for the launch abort system aeroshell, essentially. That is the ogive, basically is the fairing for the crew module. So they're working on the Artemis III versions of those. So and again, they're going to need those relatively soon if Artemis III is going to launch in a year from now. They're going to have to, I don't know how much they're going to have. We didn't get a chance to talk about acceleration for their production work, but I mean, they've already delivered the crew module pressure vessel structure for 3 Artemis 3, 4, and 5. And so that's another thing I didn't get a chance to ask them about, but they are planning to start reusing those structures beginning with Artemis 3. So I think the hope is that the crew module that returns from Artemis 3 will be turned around and refurbished for Artemis 6. They'll still need to build a new crew module adapter and European service module for those flights, though. But they are working on a considerable amount of hardware. We didn't see any of the Avcoat blocks, but they do fabricate those at MAF. And what they told us is they've obviously shipped the Artemis III blocks because those are already integrated onto the heat shield carrier in Florida. But they also told us, and I'll have to go back and listen to the Artemis V again just to make sure, but they've already fabricated the 186 blocks for the Artemis IV heat shield, and they're in work on the Artemis V blocks. So at least for those, they're doing that new. It's not a new formula for the Avcoat. It's the sort of baking process, so to speak, the cooking process, or however you want to do it, which the way that they do that to make it more permeable. And so just sort of reiterating today, I was asking them, had the formula for Avcoat changed materially between going all the way back to Apollo with that honeycomb structure and the injected cells of the heat shield, which was repeated on Exploration Flight Test 1 back in 2014. From that to the blocks that they're now fabricating, and they said it's basically the same formula, which they licensed, but the way that they, the way that they produce the blocks now, they have to be more permeable than the ones that were used on Artemis 1 and Artemis 2. So then this was actually kind of interesting to me, just because trying to figure out where they are in terms of the Artemis. Actually, let me move this down. It doesn't really matter, but for the Artemis 4 build, so we saw, I want to say, so this is the inner tank structure for Artemis 4, and then this is the forward skirt structure for Artemis 4. Both, interestingly, have not got their exterior coat of spray-on foam insulation, but that is apparently going to be happening here relatively soon. And I think we saw all of the hardware. It's just I'm trying to remember what other parts. Oh, we got to see the liquid oxygen tank. That's the only thing that remains to be welded. But we also saw the liquid hydrogen tank and the boat tail for Artemis 4. Those are still there. So there's still a decent amount of work, and I'm probably somewhat underselling that a little bit, because if they wanted to fly Artemis 4 at the beginning of 2028, they have I don't. They probably have maybe a little bit more than a year, but they'll need to deliver this. They'll need to deliver the top 4/5 of the core for the Artemis 4 core stage. Probably not too much more than a year from now. So it might be sort of similar relative to Artemis 3, where actually I'm not so sure, because the Artemis 3 is there's at least a year between Artemis 2 and Artemis 3, and probably a little more. There's a lot less than a year between Artemis 3 and Artemis 4. So yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens in terms of delivering this. But let me see if this is the other structure of Artemis 4 that we were able to image. This is the liquid oxygen tank in the vertical assembly center tool, which is this large thing here. So they've done 2 of the 3, no, 1, yes, 2 of the 3 welds. So liquid oxygen tank is 2 domes and 2 barrels. So they've done the forward dome to barrel 1 and barrel 1 to barrel 2 welds. And so this aisleway here, this transfer aisle, is where the core stage 3 top 4/5 was this time yesterday. And so because it took up this entire area here, they could not roll the aft dome in to do that final weld. But that's what they'll do now. And that will be the last major weld that they need to do for the core stage 4 structures. And then they have a lot of outfitting to do for these 2 elements, for the forward skirt, all the avionics and a lot of wiring. For the inner tank, similar. They'll have to do avionics, wiring, batteries, a lot of things. And so but first, the very next thing, and you could sort of see them starting to mask areas off here, but they're getting ready to do the SOFI, the spray-on foam insulation application for this. And similarly for the forward skirt, it's just that the forward skirts is a little bit less complicated of a foam application. That's basically a single coat on the exterior for the inner tank. They'll go in and spray, manually fill in these pockets where the ribs, where the intersecting ribs are with foam, and then they'll go over the top of that with a robotic spray. For the liquid hydrogen tank's already been welded. And we saw that. We just couldn't take pictures of it. That's actually getting ready to go out to do its proof pressure test. So that building that I pointed off in the distance, building 451, it'll go out there. So they finish the major welds. Then they have to do plug welds of where the pin is drilled into a hole is drilled into the metal when those 2 are joined, so then it can do the circumferential self-reacting friction stir welds that this tool does. And then there's another hole for them to remove the pin from that weld. Then they have to plug those. Then they do all of the non-destructive evaluation, the NDE testing that they do to make sure that those welds are good. Then they'll go out and proof test those welds. That's done with it's a pneumatic load. They put a load on one end of the structure under pressure, and then once that's done, then it'll go into its TPS applications. It'll first get a coat of primer, then a coat of SOFI, and the liquid oxygen tank is behind this one this time, and it's going to do. It will do a very similar sequence of tests. It's just that the LOX tank proof test is just done as a hydrostatic test. So they fill water up to, I believe, like the first or the bottommost weld, which is the one that takes the highest load, and then that will go through a similar thing where First they actually will take it into a cell where they will do an internal wash, and then it at that point then it's a clean area, and they have to keep it purged, and anybody that goes inside of it has to wear a bunny suit. You don't want any foreign object debris inside of the tanks after they do that. So once they do that, then they'll go put the TPS on that, the primer, and then the spray-on foam insulation, and then you start getting into those late steps that we saw with the Core Stage 3 elements last year, where they'll put the top 3 together, the forward join, which is the forward skirt, liquid oxygen tank, and inner tank. It's just that those are stacked in reverse order. So they load the inner tank into one of these cells, and then the liquid oxygen tank comes in and is bolted to it, and then they bring in the forward skirt. And in the meantime, they'll join the liquid hydrogen tank once it's got all of its thermal protection system with that same adapter. This thing here. So, and actually, I should probably come back to that for why they're going to use that again. But they will. And they'll basically be. I think really the question is they know how to do this. It's just as I say often, the question is when will this be ready? And maybe that's a good way to circle back to Core Stage 3. So one of the sort of confirmation things that we got today, or what we're hearing from Boeing, is that the engine section for this unit, which is already in the Kennedy Space Center VAB in High Bay 2, in that large vertical center tool, that one's called the Vertical Integration Center. So when this gets to Florida, they'll roll it into the transfer aisle, and they will lift it up with they have a lift spider that'll go on the front here, and they'll hook up a trailing crane to this engine section simulator, and they'll break it over to vertical, and then they'll lift it into High Bay 2, and then they will unbolt this transportation adapter, is what they call it now. I think that's what they call it. And then the rest of it will be lifted up into the vertical integration center and be bolted to the real engine section, and that's what Boeing confirmed today. They said the engine section's basically ready to go. It doesn't mean that they're completely done installing equipment in it. It's just that it's ready to be mated to the rest of the stage when they get to that point. So that'll be something to watch for. Probably, May or June. We'll see we'll see when that happens. But that'll be a big milestone for Artemis III, is getting the top 4/5 here mated to the real engine section, and then once they have that done, then you can start to bring in the RS-25 engines and install those in the bottom of the stage, and I think we saw in the press release that I think it was in the press release, or maybe it was in the Boeing feature, but they are talking about being ready to stack that, which means they'll have to be finished with it by the end of this year. So I can't remember what they said. They said later this year. So I mean, probably I'd say the fall is still probably the best bet for when that Artemis 3 core stage will be ready to lift up into High Bay 3 and be mated to the boosters. And of course, all of that stacking work is still in front of them. They haven't stacked the boosters yet either. But that's where that's going. And I'm trying to think if there was anything. I'm sure there were some other things, but I think that's kind of a good place to sort of, that circles back to the beginning of this. And so lots of parallel tracks to continue to follow. So we'll be watching to see this element get to Florida in the next sort of 7 to 10 days. If the weather and the seas are favorable, it'll get there faster. If the weather and the seas are not quite as good, it'll take a little longer. but we'll be looking to see when Pegasus gets to the Kennedy Space Center, and then we'll be waiting to see when this element is rotated to vertical and mated to the real engine section, and that will be that'll be a big milestone in final assembly for that, and probably this is the last element of the SLS for Artemis III that needs to be completed. Relatively speaking, I mean, you might be able to make an argument for the Orion stage adapter, but that's a much less complicated element. So that we'll be watching that, but then we'll still be watching what's going on here in New Orleans with these elements, with the propellant tanks and the quote unquote dry sections, which is what they call the engine section, the inner tank, and the forward skirt. So those all have to be outfitted with avionics, and the dry sections do anyway, with avionics and wire harnesses, and then they go through a standalone, a set of standalone tests of the wiring and the functional tests of the units, and then they put everything together, and eventually you have your fourth core stage. So we'll be watching to see how these progress over the rest of this year. They'll need to be significantly farther along with not just these elements in New Orleans for the fourth core stage for Artemis IV, but the engine section that's already at the Kennedy Space Center. And at some point, they're going to need to ship the boat tail, which is still here in New Orleans. Well, not here in New Orleans, but in the New Orleans metro area, but at MAF itself. But that'll need to be delivered probably by Pegasus, and so we'll have to see when that happens too. And then I'll probably get more into this in a later video or live stream, but we saw some hardware or saw some covered hardware for Core Stage 5, but I did get a little bit of a rundown of where that is. I showed you the hydrogen tank barrels, or this is the fourth of 5 hydrogen tank barrels. So they're working on the structures for Core Stage 5, but they don't have a lot of them yet. I guess it's really more, maybe it is that they have the elements on hand like this. So these are like barrel panels and the elements of the domes for the propellant tanks. And they have, we saw the engine section structures, or we didn't see them. We saw the barrel and the thrust structure is there, but it was under a tarp, so we couldn't see it, but it exists. They're working on it. But it still seems to be, it's going to be something where we're going to have to see what their acceleration plan is here, at MAF to get the fifth one built. They have a little more time to do that, but not a lot. I mean, I would imagine that would need to be completed if they're really going to hold the Artemis 5 schedule for the end of 2028. They'd really need the fifth core stage to be done in probably 2 years from now or less, being better. But that's, that we'll be watching those builds, continuing to watch those builds. So I'll just go ahead and maybe I can park it over on the shot, because this at least says where the we didn't get to see it out at the dock. Okay, so that's kind of, that's an overview. There are more details about the Core Stage 4 build and the course. I was asking him about some other things about core stage builds in general. So there'll be more to, there'll be more. I'm just kind of, I've got the laptops in a different, laid out differently here. So just looking through here to see if there are any questions. So yeah, it doesn't change I don't know how to. I'm not exactly sure how to. I don't know that it changes the big picture. I guess if you're sort of looking at drawing any conclusions, or I don't know that there was anything conclusive about this. They, I think they still have a shot to get Artemis III. To get the Orion and SLS hardware done for the Artemis III rocket and spacecraft this year. And then as we're still waiting to see what happens with HLS. I did see the. Let me grab this. I didn't see the whole thing, but I did see that the New Glenn, the third New Glenn launch was. Again, depending on if you're glass half full or glass half empty, but was not a full success. They're I don't know. Their customer was, I guess, gracious, but they did not deliver their payload to the orbit that they wanted, and I don't know how that would work for instance, for the Mark I Pathfinder. Would it have been able to? How much of its mission would it have been able to finish under the circumstances that we saw with the New Glenn 3 launch, or whether that would have been just so much of an underspeed that it would have had the same mission impact. We'll just have to see. And of course, now they're doing an anomaly investigation, but that's also not necessarily good for their schedules, because they are going to need a higher cadence of New Glenn launches, much higher than we're talking about for SLS. SLS, we're talking about an average of maybe one launch a year, which would be a lot more, which would be much higher, but it's not necessarily. New Glenn's going to need to fly much more often than that. So, and then, we're waiting for the first Starship version 3 launch. I don't know if there's been an update. I guess it's, at least it's, I don't know if it's, I have not been looking to see if we got sort of an updated vibe on when that launch will be, but maybe hopefully in the next month. So we'll just but that is still, those questions still haven't been certainly weren't addressed here. And again, I don't know, depending on the way you look at things, this was just an event that I could cover. I don't know that this, if you're talking about like the biggest news for Artemis this week, it's possible that the New Glenn thing is bigger than this. It's just this was an opportunity to get a better idea about where, specifically here in New Orleans, where Boeing is in terms of finishing the builds for Artemis 3, 4, and 5 for those core stages. And then getting whatever else we could get, but yeah, I'd say in terms of what's critical for Artemis for the next, probably for the rest of this year. Certainly this is important, but I think we need to see we need to get a better understanding of where HLS is. Certainly well before the end of this year. But that, again, it's the same thing for everybody else. It's like everybody's got their own responsibilities, and they all have to continue to work towards those. So regardless of what happens with a Starship launch or a New Glenn launch or an SLS core stage build, everybody just has to keep pressing. And I guess at some point we'll get an update on where they see some of these things taking place on the calendar. But it does, yeah, I would say it seems realistic. The Artemis 3 dates seem realistic for the Orion and SLS builds, and then we'll just have to see. Now, I when I got back, I saw that the NASA Inspector General has released an audit report on the Axiom spacesuits, I believe. I don't know if it's specifically on them or on NASA's program and how they manage that, but that's another element for probably more for Artemis 4 than for Artemis 3, but that's also something else that's going on that we have to keep an eye on as well. So, but I haven't had a chance to read that report, and I'll probably try and read that on the plane ride home. So yeah, in terms of the Psycho was asking about the reuse for Orion. I think the hope is that well, let me back up. Somewhat like the SLS Core Stage, the first two integrated units, so the Artemis 1 and Artemis 2 units, were under a development contract with Lockheed Martin, between NASA and Lockheed Martin. And then they began their production and operations contract beginning with the Artemis 3 build, and they're doing those in sets of 3. So that was contracted. It's called OPOC, which is, again, of course, another acronym, and it's just a basic Orion production and operations contract. But the first authority to proceed was for the Artemis 3, 4, and 5 builds, and that includes both the reusable crew module parts, or the intent being to reuse the crew module, but also the elements that get expended for every launch, which is the service module, which is made up of the crew module adapter and the European service module. And then there's other hardware that's discarded during the launch, the launch abort system, the fairings, the connectors, that the spacecraft adapter cone that I was talking about, that I showed a picture of, some of the units that are in process at MAF. Those are left with the SLS upper stage when Orion separates, and of course those are expended. But the plan is for Artemis 3, 4, and 5 to be new builds, and then they optioned Artemis 6, 7, and 8, and those would be the first reuses. So Artemis 3 would rotate to Artemis 6, and then Artemis 4 to Artemis 7, Artemis 5 to Artemis 8. Again, assuming I don't know how that contract would work out if, for instance, Orion went commercial. I just don't know. But the idea of flying 3, 4, and 5 with new units and then reusing those, coming back with Artemis 6, 7, and 8 was the plan. I don't know. I guess it may still be the plan until they have the commercial transition worked out. So, and that could take a while. Hang on a sec here. Well, you know what? I'll just leave it alone for now. There was a representative from the Human Landing System program here, but it's on the NASA side, and so again, it's sort of, I guess it underscores the relationship between NASA and the lunar lander providers. Even though NASA is working with the providers for these missions, both Blue Moon and Starship are commercial products, and they are owned by Blue Origin and SpaceX respectively. So that's their intellectual property. When I ask NASA officials about things like what is the Blue Moon concept of operations if they were to fly the first lunar landing on Artemis 4 now. So the rumors we've heard about not using refueling, some sort of a hybrid between Mark 1 and Mark 2 landers. They basically say you're going to have to ask Blue Origin about that. And so, again, similarly for anything about Starship. So, if it wasn't for these stories from folks like Eric Berger or the folks from Bloomberg that had the story about the using Starship for the TLI burn instead of SLS, we wouldn't hear that, because NASA, when we asked NASA about all of this, they basically have to defer to the owner of those products. So I don't know when we're going to hear about the Blue Moon proposal. We're basically going to still have to wait. So, I'm trying to think if there was anything. I guess the only thing they're just, their hands are tied. So I think the sense I got of it was we might hear what the Blue Moon proposal is if there's a contract for it. Once NASA, or if NASA elects to adjust the contract that they already have, or something like that. Once that hardware and concept and design are under contract, then, and I'm not sure if I'm phrasing it, but again, I think maybe the best way to put it is there has to be some kind of contract action before NASA. Either there has to be some kind of contract action for NASA to talk about it, or Blue Origin could give them permission to talk about it, but neither of those have happened. Let's see. There's a question about the Orion, the Artemis II Orion heat shield performance. Nothing. We didn't get anything quantitative here. I know it was asked about, but I don't. I think we heard something similar to what we've already heard, which is they're at least so far saying that it seems to have performed well, but we have not got any details. Again, other than we got. There was the image that I showed you, and there prompted a lot of speculation because it just looked, the image, I'd say, prompted questions, but then NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman addressed that, and again, I don't think he answered the questions, because I think he started out by just saying, I want to let the process where we need to do the post-flight analysis. But I think he did a good job there in that post on social media. I think it was only a week ago, just in terms of saying, this is what we think it is right now, but you need to give us some time to go through it in more detail. So we didn't get, I don't know that we got any additional detail today, other than reiterating that they think that the heat shield performed well on Artemis II. So yeah, let's see. The question is, do you think they will stack it on the engine section quickly after arrival at the VAB? So referring to what I hopefully can see on the screen here, which is the Core Stage-3 top 4 fits. That was the impression I got today, which was, because I was asking, is the engine section ready to be stacked? And that was the impression that I got was, that was kind of, I don't know about expectation, but I think I'm certainly anticipating that when this gets there, that there's not a lot of outfitting that they're going to do while it's on the transporter here. The transporter will have to stay there in Florida until they are, actually could be there for a while, depending on when they stack it for launch. They may need those that they may leave that in Florida for a little while. It is actually wouldn't be so long, but anyway, the idea would be it'll roll into the transfer aisle of the Kennedy Space Center VAB, the vehicle assembly building, and then I think we would anticipate seeing that lifted off of the these transportation carriers, the sort of mustard colored hardware. Let me, you can see it a little bit here. These those things, they will be the self-propelled modular transporters, the SPMTs will drive them over some I-beams, and then they'll set the carriers, those carriers down on some I-beams on the floor of the VAB, and then it'll sit there until they're ready to lift it up and rotate it to vertical. And that's, I think, what we're looking for, and that'll be sort of the confirmation of when are they ready to mate it to the engine section, is when they pick it up and rotate it to vertical, and then it'll go up and over into VAB high bay 2, and then they'll disconnect this engine section simulator, transportation adapter, formerly known as structural engine section structural test article, and then that'll go out. And actually, I'll be kind of curious, because that's so big. It's 8.4 meters in diameter, just like the rest of the stage. So there's not a whole lot of things that I'm not sure it can go back on ground. It probably has to go back to New Orleans on Pegasus. So that might be something else to keep an eye on if you're watching like the NSF NASA Space Flight's live streams, is when Pegasus leaves. And so, yeah, I think those will be things to look out for, this needs to be rotated to vertical. They'll need to disconnect. They'll need to disconnect this engine section simulator or transportation adapter, and then in theory that would go on some kind of ground support equipment and then be rolled onto Pegasus and taken back to New Orleans, and then it'll go into storage or whatever. But it'll wait around until the Core Stage 4 top 4/5 is ready to do the same thing. But then, that's what we're going to be looking for in terms of the Artemis III SLS stacking, is this goes to vertical, and then it's lifted into the integration center tool and mated to the real engine section. So, again, I think we'd certainly be looking for that, again, maybe in May, maybe in, maybe June. Hopefully we'll there will be an opportunity to get a little bit of an update on that when it arrives in Florida, hopefully in the next week to week and a half. But I'm not aware of any horizontal outfitting that it needs. If this was the first two core stages, did need some additional horizontal outfitting, and I did ask one of the Boeing folks there, because when Boeing finishes core stages, they will essentially turn the keys over to Exploration Ground Systems to actually do the launch stacking. And we saw this with the second core stage, where they did some fit checks, and they just evaluated that new vertical tool. But then when they were ready to stack it, they had to actually they have to do this sort of two breakover thing, where they take it back to vertical, or take it back to horizontal, and then Exploration Ground Systems has some work to do in the systems tunnel, where they start installing some of the flight termination system components. So they have to do that first, and then it's rotated back to vertical for stacking. So it sounds like they're going to need to do that again. But in this case, the stage isn't done yet. So, there you can kind of see here. So you can see up here at the top, you can see this. This is part of one of the two liquid oxygen feed lines that run down the exterior of the stage, and you can see it's about half done. So, and it looks like on the bottom, on the 180 degrees, the other side of the stage, a very similar thing. So they've got, I believe all of that will be done in, I believe all of that will be done in the vertical now, but I guess we'll see. So yeah, I know there's still some conjecture. I did see the social media post from Mr. Isaacman about there's still, I know there's still folks that want Mobile Launcher 2, but I mean, I think that the argument that the administration's making about Exploration Upper Stage and Mobile Launcher 2 is kind of a sunk cost fallacy argument. I think it's so. I don't think they agree with the argument that because they're almost done that they should be finished. I think they would probably argue generically that you finish them because you finish them based on whether or not based on other criteria. But I don't, it's an interesting question, actually. I think just in terms of the formality of, I asked a couple of questions about Exploration Upper Stage today, but they really didn't talk about it. And the folks that are talking about this and doing the tours inside the buildings, like those decisions are way above their pay grade. And so, they did not talk about Exploration Upper Stage today unless asked. And I think that is still, again, in terms of the formality of do they have the authority to completely cancel that at this point or not? Same thing with Mobile Launcher 2. That'll be something I guess we'll find out. Now, they've stopped work on both of them. I don't know that they explicitly said that for Exploration Upper Stage, but they have stopped work. I was able to see a decent amount of hardware inside the facility. None of it was assembled. We didn't go inside the area where they had a lot of it, but there were some parts that were uncovered that we did see. But I don't know whether they're able to officially scrap some of those things. And so similarly with Mobile Launcher 2, so they've removed some of the umbilical arms. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of curious. They may be able to begin to disassemble it, but they probably have to have some sort of a argument or way of, I guess, preserving it. So I don't know if they can go as far as sort of destroying hardware yet. And they've of course talked about the fact that the roles have reversed in terms of a year ago, the thought would have been after Artemis III, Mobile Launcher 1 would no longer be of any use, and then they would basically harvest it for parts, pick the carcass, so to speak. And so it's just the roles have reversed. So now at least seems like that's what they're going to do with Mobile Launcher 2. And they have started at least removing some of that hardware for sparing, I guess. And so, yeah, these incomplete parts of the stage will be done after it's lifted into after it's lifted and mated to the engine section. So they'll be doing all of those things in parallel. So there are, inside this part of the aft end of the liquid hydrogen tank, they have, I'm assuming that they've attached I know they attached the aft manifold. I believe they've probably, we didn't get into that, but I believe they've attached the pre-valves to that, but those would need to go in. Once it's mated to the engine section, then they'll be able to mate the liquid hydrogen feed lines, which are basically just, a straight shot from the pre-valves to the 4 hydrogen inlets on each of the engines. And they'll finish they did a significant amount of welding of the repressurization lines, but obviously they could not complete those. They'll have to finish that orbital tube welding once they've mated those sections. They'll need to finish outfitting the systems tunnel wiring runs. There's and then there's some additional, you can see here, you can see some of the foam sprays here looking a little lumpy because they haven't been sanded or trimmed, and you can see in other places where it's got that green color similar to over here on the simulator that they just have primer on them, and so they need to finish. They're going to need to finish foam sprays when they get to later when they get into the cell. So they'll be doing a lot of outfitting. It's possible that the engine section itself, they still have. They may still have areas where they have to put in cork, and they may still have areas of cork that still need to be covered with the moisture barrier paint. It's called Hypalon. It's just the white. It's the white coloring of the engine section you see before launch. After that, then it gets all toasty. But they'll do that later on. So basically, what's next for the stage is they'll mate this with the engine section. They'll be doing all of the finishing all the internal and external outfitting, install the engines, and then once it's sort of fully assembled, they will do a series of tests called Final Integrated Functional Test. And then once that's done and the stage is basically complete, then that's when they'll hand it over to Exploration Ground Systems for stacking. So yeah, I mean, again, given the uncertainty, it's still a question. And so, I mean, again, I guess, I have talked a lot in the last maybe 6 months or so about whether no news is good news or bad news. We don't know for sure. It's just that it has not in the past. No news generally has not been good news, but we just don't know at this point. And so, yeah, I would certainly rather that we get some better sense of where the lunar landers are than we have right now. But so we don't know for sure if where they are relative to Artemis III and Artemis IV, for that matter. And it just historically, not just for HLS, but for all of them, typically when we don't hear about, what we're looking at on the screen here, when we weren't hearing about core stage production, they were having issues. When we didn't hear about Orion, production or integrated testing, they were having issues. I mean, it wasn't like they were the end of the world issues, but it tended to mean there were delays. So yeah, I prefer to hear where they are, just to get a sense of their schedules too. Not just for Artemis III, but really for the big one is Artemis IV now, which is the lunar landing. So yeah, I mean, I am kind of curious if they really are going to talk about the upper stage choice for Artemis III in the next couple of weeks, or let's say next month, in the next month or so. That would be interesting. because that would imply, at least in my mind, would kind of imply, or again, maybe to be fair, I'd just say I would infer from that choice that they've made other choices about not just Centaur 5 integration with SLS, but also HLS, that they have some idea about HLS and what HLS will be capable of doing for in a year from now. So, but we'll see. That's a good. I have not. I every once in a while I've taken a peek at a couple of places, and just looking at what people are reporting about progress on China. So I may have missed more than one thing, but I think what I'm waiting for. I think what the collective we are waiting for is the beginning of the first launches of the Long March 10 family of launch vehicles. But I think ultimately, if we're talking about lunar lander and lunar landing architectures, we're going to need to see several steps beyond that, which is going to be the triple core. When does that triple core launch vehicle finally fly for the first time? And I mean, it's a non-trivial set of milestones they have in order to get to there. But I don't recall hearing a lot about the crew transport or the lunar lander recently, just because I think some of the big milestones that they've done, are they've done the launch abort system tests. They've done lunar landing tests. We'll just have to see. We'll have to see what their plans are. And then, of course, again, the question is when's that first triple core Long March 10 launch? Is that their first? Are they going to? I believe that the crew transport is going to be tested on the single stick, and I think they're still hoping to do that by the end of this year. But when's that test flight? Are they considering what type of what's the first test? What's the first flight test of their lunar lander? If you recall, for Apollo, the first uncrewed test was just an Earth orbit test with just the Saturn. That was the Saturn 1B vehicle had the capability of launching either the crew, the command service modules partially loaded, or the lunar module. And so there was, again, it's an interesting tangent, and I wish there was more documentation on it, but they were at one time talking about doing a dual launch, dual Saturn 1B launch with a crew. I think the first, the Jim McDivitt crew that flew Apollo 9, which was the D mission, there was I think it was called either Apollo 205-208 or Apollo 207-208, where they'd launch the lunar module and then the crew and the command service modules and do essentially a dual launch version of Apollo 9. But then that ended up not happening. It just ended up being Apollo 9 on a Saturn V. So I think now the question is, is the first test flight of the lunar module just going to be a lunar, kind of like they're talking about with the uncrewed lunar landing? I think before this we were expecting the first Starship HLS to be the full, well, not full, but a significant working prototype to go to the moon and do the uncrewed lunar landing test. Now I think you can argue that if you had a prototype that supported the life support systems and the crew systems, even if it didn't go to the moon, that would still be a significant prototype. So we'll just have to see. And then for the Chinese lunar lander, is that first flight test going to be a lunar flight test? And similarly, it will be an uncrewed lunar landing, or would it just be maybe a lunar orbit test? Again, I think I'd have to go back and look, but we don't really know. I don't know that that's necessarily something that's going to be announced anytime soon. Yeah, I haven't even, I haven't, basically only seen, like I saw a sound bite a TV channel, basically. So I have not, I have not even downloaded I haven't downloaded that, that OIG report yet. But I think, again, if you're listening to the summary, again, maybe I think the one liner that I heard on, again, so this is, it could be even, it at best might be secondhand, but they were talking about, maybe if they have issues that the spacesuits might not be ready till 2031. Now, I don't know how they got to that exactly. So, and if you recall, Axiom Space just did they held a media event at that Colorado Springs symposium. I don't know whether they said anything about the upcoming OIG report, but they would probably have known that was, impending, that was imminent. That's the word I was looking for. They would have known by the time of the symposium that report was imminent. And I don't recall them saying anything about that. So, I mean, basically what we need, similarly for HLS, we know the next Artemis milestones, and so for the AXEMU, when's critical design review, and when is that crewed vacuum test? When are they going to do that? There was another one that they talked about at the symposium that was reported on. I saw a story by Jeff Faust for Space News. But those are the ones that I've been waiting for, is when is that crewed vacuum test of the spacesuit on the ground, and then after that, when's critical design review for the suit? So yeah, the question is, are the engines critical path for doing this mate of the 4/5 to the real engine section in Florida? No, they're not. So they're going to follow the similar sequence of, well, that's not a good way of putting it, but just the overall way that they do this is they join all the elements of the stage first, and then the engines are installed after that. So the engines are installed into a fully assembled stage. So they don't go in the engine section before the stage is a mated whole. So so the engines are not even in Florida yet, but I was talking to somebody from L3 Harris today, and that they basically just reiterated what we'd already heard, which is the engines are ready, the Artemis III engines are ready. They're just waiting for basically they're waiting for the phone call to ship them from Stennis to Kennedy Space Center. So yeah, Anthony's talking about, so the real tempo increaser will be when a crew is announced. Yeah, I know I'm several minutes behind here still, but I wonder again. I guess I'm not sure we were going to get anything if maybe there was sort of a media gaggle with NASA Associate Administrator Amit Kshatriya and Dr. Lori Glaze. And I sort of ducked in and out of that because that was happening simultaneously with the core stage rollout stuff, and I did want to get some imagery of that, even though I know the NASA imagery is going to be way better than what I have. But I suspect I know they were asked about when the crew is going to be announced for Artemis III, but to be fair, I mean, they were asked about that the night that Artemis II splashed down. And I think the answer back then was a whole 10 days ago was soon, but we're not going to give you, we're not ready to say whether that's in a few days, in a few weeks, in a few months. But maybe, if they have a date for that, if they'd announced a time frame for that, I'm sure that will come out here in the next not so long. But see, so again, I'm catching up to this again. There's still some discussion in here about, I guess, SLS cadence and if there was more infrastructure, and that's of course been true the whole time. But I think the problem for even potential infrastructure, additional infrastructure for SLS at this point is, even if you had the money to do it and started to implement that right now, I don't know that it would be ready. I don't know when it would be ready. I don't know that it would. So again, same thing with Mobile Launcher 2. Even if they had just continued Exploration Upper Stage and Mobile Launcher 2, that was part of the rationale for why they stopped, is because they weren't seeing a path to it being ready by the end of 2028. And I wouldn't expect anybody to push back on the decision, because again, it's above their pay grade. And I didn't hear any of that. I asked about, sort of in passing, asked about Exploration Upper Stage to a couple of Boeing folks. And if you recall, when NASA announced this a couple of months ago, they included a quote from somebody with Boeing. So at the very least, the Boeing's board or C-suite or whoever the folks up at the top have accepted it, I guess. I don't know how. I don't know. I just have not detected any necessarily a subtle pushback. But I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see if there's anything to come. But again, that's the problem for Mobile Launcher 2 and for Exploration Upper Stage is their schedule. And the thing is that if you wanted to fly this cadence, I'm not sure they'd be able to do both increased cadence and Exploration Upper Stage. And so, yeah, I don't know I'm not sure what. This is just a guess in terms of, we're talking about Artemis III. Actually, you know what? It's actually kind of a good question. So Anthony's asking, or was asking a few minutes ago, talking about beginning the stacking of Artemis III and the crew announcement. I mean, I don't know that he's asking specifically, but it is, I think, kind of an interesting question about which is first. I guess if I had to guess, and this is just a pure guess, that the crew, if they really were advertising soon, that we might hear about the crew before they begin stacking, but it depends on how quickly they begin stacking. I don't think the booster segments are going to be ready to stack for probably, I don't think so. Maybe the beginning of next quarter. So again, maybe by mid-year, July, next second quarter ends end of June. So that's end of second quarter, end of the spring, beginning of the third quarter, beginning of summer. That's probably about where maybe the soonest that I think we would see the boosters being ready to stack. And then again, I'm assuming that the mobile launcher refurbishment and repairs would be in that sort of time frame, maybe sooner. But I guess it's possible either way. Maybe they wait. It's not that far away. It's only a couple of months from now. So I don't know. I guess right now, if I had to guess, just the way that they talked about that we might hear about the crew before they start stacking. And that would probably be good. Again, it might not be. It'll be interesting to see. Now, I did hear again in the Artemis II crew press conference, they did say something in there about the training, and so again, maybe the Artemis III crew doesn't need 12 months, but it is going to be a pretty complicated mission because they're going to have to, unless they can constrain it. So again, if they're going to rule out, we're seeing this issue with New Glenn now. When's is that going to affect the schedule for the Mark 1 Pathfinder, that lunar lander, that cargo lunar lander, that first flight? If that delays that, does that mean that Artemis 3 is already down to Starship at that point? I mean, there would be hypothetical downsides to that, or downsides to that hypothetical, but it also might focus what the mission's about, that it's just one lunar lander and maybe the spacesuits, but maybe not. So a lot of what ifs at this point. So it'll this is going to be there's a lot of news for the rest of this year, from the lunar landers and from again all the things we've been watching for Artemis 3 for a while. So SLS and Orion production, and whether that finishes by the end of this year, and then again all of the things that we're waiting for the lunar landers, like propellant transfer demos and lunar landing test flights, like with the Blue Moon Mark 1 lander. All of that is still supposed to happen this year. I'm not so sure. So OMG Rockets was asking, and it's one of those. I don't have that good of a feel now, because I don't know how it's not totally clear how Congress views SLS at this point. I do think there's more of a question mark about whether it flies beyond Artemis 5. It's really up to them, though. I think the White House is ready to move on, and so whether that means there's a gap between the last SLS launch and the first, whether the the commercial crew transport launch is Orion on another launch vehicle, or it's just a completely new. It doesn't have SLS and it also doesn't have Orion. If there's a gap, I still think that the White House is willing to, that I think it's sort of the benefits outweigh the costs. Except again, that's the reason that they're getting rid of it, is because it isn't just the cadence, but it's also the cost of it. So it's harder to tell now, because it seemed like a year ago this time. It seemed like, well, no, not a year ago, but again, a year ago last summer. It seemed like Congress was leaving that open and just saying let's postpone this discussion until the end of the decade. But now that they gave the White House and Jared Isaacman the green light to stop Exploration Upper Stage and Mobile Launcher 2, I think that it certainly leaves you wondering whether SLS will fly any more than 5 times. I think there's a lot more. If I had to, I don't know what I'd put a number on it, but I would say the chances of SLS flying a 6th time are lower than they were 3-4 months ago. But it's up to Congress. Let's see. So, Space Enthusiast was asking, are they rolling the core stage now? They're probably on the barge by this time. They've probably been on the barge for a while. So it's really, I think, just a question of they roll it onto the barge. They have to secure it to the deck of the barge, and then the SPMTs will also ride on Pegasus. And the SPMTs have to be secured to the deck of the Pegasus, and then they'll also need to set up some purge equipment for the equipment in the inner tank and the forward skirt. There's avionics and some other equipment in there that needs to be kept at least decently air conditioned. So, but once they have all that, that probably shouldn't take more than a shift or two, and then it's just a question of whether. But I wouldn't be surprised if the weather and the seas are good if Pegasus leaves New Orleans tomorrow. I think it could be that soon. It just, again, it depends on when they're ready to go and whether the weather and the sea conditions are ready. But if those were all ready, if those all line up by tomorrow, I wouldn't be surprised. And as we've been talking about with these dates for Artemis III moving up, the sooner that this gets there and the sooner that they can get it mated to the engine section is the sooner that they can get the core stage done. And then that means they can get into, they can stack the boosters already, but once the boosters are stacked, they're going to be sitting there waiting for the core stage. So the sooner that they can get this to Kennedy Space Center, the better for the schedule. So the rollout was this morning. It was a little, they started backing it out around, I want to say 7:30 a.m. local here, which would have been Central Time. So it was probably down by the docks by lunchtime here, and then they probably, again, it's already 5:30 here, so they had been working to get it secured to the barge and get all of the equipment onto all the equipment they need when they get to Florida to then move it into the VAB. All of that will have to go on the barge too. And then of course the crew is going to have to be ready to go, but I assume that they've been standing by. So it's the distance from the factory to the barge at the dock there is, I think, a mile or so. So it's not that long of a distance. So it's just, it should already be on the barge. And it's just a question of whether everything's secured and whether they've got everything packed on board that they need, and then looking at the weather. I guess I'm a little surprised. I'm a little surprised that they're still. I really am expecting things to calm significantly down. I appreciate you folks that are here for this live stream, but I really was kind of thinking things were just going to go back to a little, a small little channel here. But I guess there's still some stuff going on. So, but I guess I'm a little surprised that we're still getting some spam in chat. So let me see if I can find the. I don't know if it would be on here or. Let me see if I can find that story by Jeff Faust. No, that wasn't it. So the question being about There was another test besides the crewed vacuum test. It would be in a thermal vacuum chamber, but again, it's the critical aspect of it. Although not, I guess both of them are. But the idea is that you'd have a person in the suit, and you're taking the suit down to vacuum, or the environment around the suit, and so the suit's got to protect the person from the elements, like it's going to have to in real life. And oh boy, no, I don't have it here, and I'm not sure I can find it on there. But there was another that was the test that the government accounting office had called out a couple of years ago. So, I mean, that one will definitely have to be done. But there was another test that they were talking about in there. But it doesn't. I mean, I would assume that they would have to complete critical design review before they would do, an EVA. But they were talking about doing either Artemis III or doing a full outside EVA on the space station. But I don't know what other. I mean, critical design review is usually the point in the project life cycle where you have a design that you can build. But of course, they've been building prototype suits. They've been doing underwater testing, but not at vacuum. But I mean, the suit still has to protect the astronauts and test engineers from those elements. But I think the Axiom Space was talking about in that symposium, again, this is from Jeff Faust reporting for Space News, that they were looking to do that test in space testing next year. But that, I think, would still be predicated on completing critical design review. And so, in terms of the Artemis III crew, I would expect there to be a crew named by midsummer too. I don't think I do think it is relatively soon. And so whether or not they're stacking the vehicle, I think I would be more surprised if there was no crew named by midsummer than the other way around. I mean, then that's a good question. So Joe was asking, how much time does an Artemis III crew need to train on an HLS? Again, it maybe depends on how much, how far they would train, because there's this, again, spectrum of possible test objectives that you could include in Artemis III now, such that it was more like, so Apollo 9 to me would define a sort of a full set of test objectives. But to be fair, Artemis III is talking about doing this with 2 lunar landers. So it, in theory, could be more complicated, even if you only did some things with one and some things with the other. So I think that's one dimension of this that's large, that complicates it, is they have to train for both lunar landers, Starship systems and Blue Moon systems. And then then you get back to the question of how far do you go into the lunar lander? So do you dock with it? If you dock, then do you open the hatches? And if you do that, do you completely get into the lunar lander, close the hatches, and undock from Orion like they did on Apollo 9 with those vehicles? If you're going to go that far with the crew getting, or part of the crew getting into the lunar lander, undocking and flying the lunar lander free flight, that's you're increasing the scope of the mission as you go. And so it's, again, it is not clear. It's not clear yet whether what they've ruled in or ruled out. I mean, maybe, so they could. I do think that they want to be able to dock with one or both of them, at the very least. But again, you have to start to wonder how valuable is a flight test for the HLS vehicles if you were to just dock to it's just a docking target. It's an Agena instead of a LEM. Although again, Agena wasn't a completely passive docking target either, but it's not something that they can ingress, and I know they talked about doing that. So is this, again, if you're just talking about how, the question being how much do they need to train on HLS? So if you dock with it and open the hatches and then look around, maybe, just look around basically, and then close the hatches and undock, and that, I don't know, that's kind of more like that's kind of more like when we were talking about Gateway, which was also canceled, and Block 1 and SLS Block 1B on the first Block 1B launch. They were supposed to be taking the IHAB element to the Gateway, and in that case, they were going to do the Apollo style transposition, separating transposition and docking. And in theory, they were probably going to open the hatches to the IHAB on the way to the Gateway on that Artemis IV, now canceled now canceled version of Artemis IV. But I mean, if that's the kind of thing you're just training on it's essentially a big habitat or logistics module, and you're not going to the difference between an IHAB and a logistics module is that HLS is a flyable spacecraft. It's a spacecraft that the astronauts are going to have to be able to fly in some way, shape, or form, even if they're just using the autopilot. It's like you still have to tell it what you want to do, even if you're just letting the autopilot do it, and that still requires some level of training. If you're just opening the hatches up and making sure that the environments equalize, not just pressure but all of the humidity and so forth, that's still a good test, and you still got the docking test, but it may not be as much or as broad a scope of training that needs to be done for that. But then again, the flip side of that is, what do you get? What test objectives are you getting from an HLS standpoint? And again, that's one of the many questions. So now if we're talking about Artemis III, if the Axiom suit flies on one, or I mean, again, I don't know whether they just pick one. Maybe they just pick Starship because it's a big vehicle and it's got an airlock. Of course, I don't know if it has an airlock on Artemis III, but it's in theory has more room. But you could do, if you only had one suit, you could still do an exercise where, since it doesn't sound like they're going to do an extravehicular activity, they would just be, donning and doffing the suits. In theory, you could have a suit that was sort of generically sized, and you could have multiple crew members don the suit and doff the suit, because you're not necessarily going to be doing a huge amount of activities in the suit. I think possibly that's one of the things you're trying to evaluate, that you would have basically an extended period of time in 0G. Again, we just saw the Artemis II crew go through a test exercise of donning and doffing the suits. I think that was on the way to the moon. It's sort of irrelevant. It's just they did it in flight, because that's probably the longest period of time that they had with the suits in microgravity. And so this is the first time that they got a chance to do it where they weren't doing parabolas where you get whatever 30 seconds or 30 seconds to a minute of 0G, and then you go and then you're not in 0G anymore. In this case, they're in that environment for an extended period of time. And so that would give you some data on that. And you could have multiple astronauts do that in theory. But yeah, and then several astronauts have used the Axiom suit in the neutral buoyancy lab in Houston. I think but I don't know that that's necessarily so. They don't don and doff those suits in the pool, for instance. They're they get in and out of them outside the water. So I don't know that really is testing those procedures in an in-space environment. Oops. I'm trying to catch up. Yeah, I don't think I'm not expecting, especially in the case of Jenny Gibbons. I think I have nothing to go on, so I haven't heard any rumors or anything about backups for the way that they did backups for Artemis II was different than the way that they did backups for Apollo, for instance. They did a little bit of this in shuttle, where they had in some cases had a single backup crew member that was added to a crew because because there was one of the crew had an absence. In this case, Andre Douglas, if there had been a U.S. crew that had an issue, he would have rotated. There would have been a rotation of roles. If you go back to Apollo, those I think each seat, commander, command module pilot, lunar module pilot, had defined roles and defined prime and backup crew members. But I think so. Again, this is just speculation, but I don't think Canada has an agreement with the U.S. for a seat on Artemis III, which in theory would mean that Jenny Gibbons has less of a chance, or maybe none. I don't know which seats are available for non-U.S. astronauts on Artemis III, if any. But I would say Andre Douglas has a better chance than Jenny Gibbons does. But I also don't know that he's necessarily guaranteed a seat on Artemis III. So yeah, I really don't know who's. I don't know. It isn't something that I follow as much in terms of like the. There are, I guess, people who have maybe, or certainly better than I am about speculating about that. So I really don't know. I'm just thinking in terms of, again, the issue for Jenny Gibbons is because she's a Canadian Space Agency astronaut, and so there are different agreements. But I also don't think that there would necessarily be an astronaut that would be. There would be. Well, it's an interesting question, but I don't know that they would necessarily assign an astronaut based on familiarity with the Axiom suit, especially since we're not even sure if that suit's going to go on is going to fly. and again, I also don't know this for sure, but I would just assume that for Artemis 4, and I think probably for Artemis 5, there will be 2 crew will be going to the lunar surface and 2 crew will stay in Orion. I would assume if you really were going to have as a test objective for part of the Artemis 3 crew to pilot HLS, again, undock and fly it, that there would be 2 crew members that would do that, and it would be similar again to the idea for roles and responsibilities for Artemis 4 and Artemis 5 now. And I can't see them doing. I mean, it isn't impossible, I guess, but I couldn't see them having only 1 crew member get in HLS, even though in theory we've heard that SpaceX doesn't want there to be the ability to do manual override of the Starship systems. So I guess in theory you could do that, because if you have a totally automated system, then maybe it doesn't matter if there's anybody. You could have anybody sit in there, and maybe it would one person, but it may also be there's a sort of a buddy system feel to it, similar to spacewalks now. I don't know that they would do, like we saw again many, many years ago. We saw a 1 space shuttle EVA with 3 crew members, but I think it's more likely that you would see something like that than that you'd see a single crew member EVA, at least for an extended period of time. I think there have been cases where one of the crew has had either a suit problems and they've gone back to the airlock on the International Space Station early, and then the other one was out there, but that was not planned in advance. Yeah, so Joker's talking about the plan that they talked about in the symposium, or the options that they talked about in the symposium, were for they could do a test on Artemis 3, which would be more of an intravehicular activity. So they wouldn't go outside to vacuum. They would do some level of testing, again, in 0G, that they can't do right now. But they might, again, or similar to what they're doing in the neutral buoyancy lab. Of course, it wouldn't be lunar landing testing necessarily, but they could don the suit, they could seal it, maybe even take it off the umbilicals, and then just do it, see how it goes in the cabin, and then doff the suit, and maybe have multiple crew members do that. But then, pardon me, what they were talking about, I guess almost as more likely, was they would fly the suit to the International Space Station, and then there they'd be looking at doing an EVA with the suit. Again, I don't know whether it would be 2 suits or whether it would be, one with the current EMUs, the shuttle era EMUs, and one with the new suit. But I would assume that would be a 2-person EVA. And so, yeah, we have there is a hearing, there is a budget hearing on Wednesday, so day after tomorrow, in front of the Oversight Committee, that Joker's mentioning here in chat 15 minutes ago. But now Marcia Smith with Space Policy Online noted, I saw somebody, so again, this is sort of secondhand, but I saw somebody posting one of her social media posts that the House CJS Appropriations Committee, so Commerce, Justice, and Science, but that part of appropriations is going to have their own hearing on the NASA budget next Monday. So there's going to be a couple of House hearings here relatively quickly, and then they're already talking about doing a CJS appropriations bill markup. So at least the markup, I think, will give us a better indication of where Congress, or at least where the House is in terms of probably more of the big picture questions. Because the Artemis stuff, so to speak, in the budget request is in line with what they talked about with the new plans, with the higher cadence of Artemis missions, with the ignition event. It's the science budget, probably more than anything, but not only. But it's again, I'll be curious how much pushback there is in either or both of these hearings, considering that Mr. Isaacman is in the same party as the majority, or certainly representing the same party as the majority. And so I think the majority's party is going to be very polite. And I'll be curious to see how, I don't know how, I'll be curious to see how hard the Democrats push on this. And of course, I'll be curious to see if they push on this, what Mr. Isaacman's responses are. But I think ultimately we're going to be looking at what the bill and the report. Of course, we don't know if we're going to get the report right away, but what does the first bill marked up look like, and what does the accompanying report for that look like as well? That'll tell us what they're willing to do. And then the Senate's going to be maybe even more important, because the dynamic last year was the House pretty much went along with the White House cuts. And the reason that not the reason, but one of the reasons it's important is because there will at some point supposedly be another presidential administration, and there will be a new House, a new Senate, and I don't know that if you had different parties in power, and one of them cut the budget by this much, that they would take it out of science. They might, it's like you could see the shoe on the other foot, so to speak, or an airplane like the hand on the other foot. But you could see the hand on the other foot with different people in power, where they take the money out of exploration and put it in science. I guess another way of putting it is that it makes NASA more partisan. It makes the politics align more with the parties, whereas it has typically aligned more along the lines of regions, which don't necessarily align along the lines of the parties. So again, we'll be watching it same way as we always watch it, because maybe a little more again because there's a lot more friction between this year's proposal and last year's proposal. These proposals are much more proposing very different ways of doing things than in the past, and we'll have to see. Last year, Congress rejected the science cuts, but the White House basically reproposed the same level of funding and a lot of the same cuts. And so just because Congress restored them last year doesn't mean they're going to restore them this year. We have to wait and see what happens. And so so the New Glenn issue is another thing that we're going to be looking at. It's going to take a while for that to figure out what the impact of that is. Just seeing if there's anything else here. I mean, again, I like the, as I was just saying, I'm catching up, but yeah, that it's the whatever happened on New Glenn Flight 3 is going to be something that's that's going to be in the news for sure. But then, again, next up is Starship, and that first flight. And so we'll see how that goes. There's no relationship between the two. I mean, I don't know how much of a competition there was or is between the two. It's really hard to put what Blue Origin is doing into context. We just don't have that. That's their prerogative. They know, but we don't. And then for Starship, I mean, you could kind of say the same thing, but there's just different variables involved there. So, I mean, again, I'll be very curious to see if we have any better idea at all about what the rest of the year looks like for Starship after the first flight, or whether we're just gonna find out what the next flight is, which is basically how it's been the whole time for the last 3 years. But that doesn't really, again, we don't know when the propellant, when's the prop transfer demo, when do those launches begin. I don't know that we're going to be any closer to knowing what that is, even though I'm sure that I would say both SpaceX and NASA will know much better after that flight, but I don't know that they're necessarily going to tell anybody in public. But yeah, that's, and again, like I said, I'm kind of catching up, although I guess I'm not. I'm still about 10 minutes behind. I don't like it. You could, I guess I would say the same thing. So I don't know that the issue, whatever this issue was with the second stage on this last New Glenn launch, I don't know that it really changes anybody else's situation that much. In fact, I don't think it does. It doesn't affect any of the other programs. I don't think it affects SpaceX, other than if you say that it gives them a better chance to win the race, if it really is a race. I mean, I guess it is, or competition. But I think at this point they're both trying to establish lunar capabilities and all of the things involved in that. And I don't know that this impacts, an issue with one doesn't impact the other. It's just it affects, this definitely affects Blue Moon and Blue Origin and New Glenn, but I don't know that it affects anybody outside of that, at least not to any great degree. And I also don't think, for instance, it's not going to improve anybody's schedule. It might impact Blue Origin schedules, but I don't think it's going to improve anybody else's schedules. Unless, again, if you're just talking relative to somebody else's, that doesn't really help anymore, because this is a race against, the big picture race is against the calendar. So it's not going to set 2028 back. That's coming whether we like it or not. No, I did not. So Jolie's saying there's a post. It is showing a photo of the. That's cool. Let me see if I can. That would be cool. A picture of the Artemis II heat shield. Is it a blog? No, I don't see it on the blog, so let me check over here. That's probably something that I'm going to have to digest if they really have they've posted a picture that quickly, that's cool. Because like we didn't get that picture for 2 years, I think, last time. So okay, okay, yeah, no, this is definitely something I'll need to digest. But so it's broader than just whoops. It's broader than just Orion and the Orion heat shield. It's talking about SLS as well. Let me see if I can. Okay, so this is underwater imagery. That's it. Okay. Whoops. Let's see. Can I do this? Yeah, I could. Let me see if I can bring this up for grins. I'm looking at it on the other computer. But it would just be up on nasa.gov. I just don't know if I have this loaded into the... I think at that hiring that... I saw it on the breaking news, but I don't see it on... Okay, here it is. Let me see if I can pull this up. I got a few minutes here. But yeah, this will definitely be something that I need to digest. So yeah, this is the assessment or the assessment page. The browser is being annoying as usual. No, actually, it does look like it's mostly on. Okay. But yeah, this is the image of this. Whoops. This is the image of the heat shield. Not great, or not a full, not bad, but doesn't look like it's a full. Again, this is what's interesting about this image is you can see, well, not the only thing, but you can see one of the separation, one of the 4 separation areas. That's one of the retention and release. So obviously, I think given how long the investigation took on the Avcoat panels, that's one thing. That's probably the big thing. But then they had one of the 4 bolts on Artemis 1 did not fully retract. And so we're seeing a decent amount of the heat shield here in this picture, but not all of it. And I'm trying to find the, I guess over here in the dark is another one. And then based on that geometry, I guess the third one would be over here, but they're sort of, it's hard to see them. I guess you can make that out. But it's, yeah, this is not, so when they released the investigation photos, they had a full picture. Of course, that was after the Orion had returned to Kennedy Space Center. Now, I guess to be fair, this doesn't seem to show a lot of char loss, but, you know, trying to see if they mention in here. Okay. So diver imagery and further inspections found the char loss behavior observed on Artemis 1 was significantly reduced, both in terms of quantity and size. I guess that means it wasn't eliminated, but I don't know. Again, I don't know that, I'm not sure exactly what that means either, because I don't know what the requirement is, you know. But you know, again, another way, if you want to look at it, another way, you can say, well, apparently they're saying that they did see some char loss, but it was significantly reduced. So, I mean, again, you know, maybe certainly would be interesting to see if you could quantify that more, but then also the secondary question is, so, you know, what's the impact I guess, one of the things they talked about pre-flight was, how well did they model the behavior of this heat shield pre-flight, and what are they seeing compare, how the models do. So there's that. I guess I did hear today that one of the things that they were talking about for SLS was they saw the vibrations on Artemis 1, and they put in strakes to try and address some of that. And they, again, they didn't quantify it today, but they did. The person I was talking with said that they did see, better. They saw improved performance. That they didn't see they saw the vibrations were better managed by that. But again, that's not really quantifying. And yeah, they don't really talk about. Okay, but they do go. Okay, they do go into the mobile launcher more. So yeah, that's again the pneumatic system and the washdowns that they couldn't perform on Artemis 1. So they're saying, the hardening allowed the pneumatic system to remain operational post-launch, and the critical cooling and washdown water flows proceeded. And that's about it. Well, again, I'll need to go through it in more detail, but it does seem like, it's definitely good that they were able to, let me leave that up. It's good news. I think the question is, again, for the issues that they did see, which are, they don't really talk about them in detail, but I guess that's another way of looking at this is, so maybe if you start over from scratch, so to speak, and that may take a little while longer. So it's like, if you just look at a generic mission, what in-flight anomalies did they have on this mission? Again, those probably are still being graded, or maybe I guess even for EGS, but what are the in-flight anomalies? What is the impact of them? Again, maybe back up. What are the in-flight anomalies, if any? And then if they had any, what's sort of the initial assessment of the impact to either to Artemis 3 specifically, or just in general. We still have the question of the hydrogen leak that occurred, that because we saw a repeat of the hydrogen leak. I don't know about the first time, but I mean, we saw that the tail service mast umbilical leak multiple times on Artemis 1. We saw it leak significantly the first time that the vehicle was fueled / tanked on Artemis 2. That could be that would be maybe not as bad on Artemis 3, but it would still be a schedule hit for any launch campaign if you were to have the first tanking leak hydrogen, because it means you have to stop and fix it. And I don't just mean from a countdown. It means like you have to stop, scrub, detank, and then you've got maybe a week and a half's worth of work to get back into a countdown configuration. And then we're back in this, the cycle that we were in February is like, okay, so do you do a tanking test, or do you just go straight into a launch attempt? So the first time they did a second tanking test, and then the second time they just went straight into a launch attempt. So yeah, there are things like that, but I do think big picture, it does seem at this point like it's fair to say there isn't really anything. We don't see anything here that's necessarily a showstopper for them to at least press forward with preparations for Artemis 3, just purely in terms of exploration ground systems, Orion and SLS. But they will continue to go through that post-flight assessment review process for a while. I don't. Again, maybe it's on an accelerated pace now too, but we still have, again, this, as I said, this doesn't affect the good performance on Artemis II does impact those elements that flew on Artemis II, but it doesn't have any impact, good or bad, on the other elements, on the spacesuits or on the lunar landers, because they're independent. It's independent work. It's just that now we're talking about, that's one of the tests, and I guess you could say, even if the one of the things that they want to do from an enterprise level testing is trying to coordinate launches in, at the very least, 2 of them. So launching Starship and then launching SLS and doing a rendezvous and docking that way, or with New Glenn and Blue Moon, or both. And then that would be kind of a stress test where you're trying to synchronize launches of all 3 rockets and all 3 systems, at the same time, basically. And then that will be a test for Exploration Ground Systems, Orion and SLS, in terms of how they position themselves relative to somebody else's launch campaign. That's they might still get something out of that exercise for Artemis III, even if they didn't do the other things. But I think it's fair to say what I thought I saw some folks saying in chat, which is that enough to make it worth it if you don't have something that you can rendezvous and dock with, or more? And so, yeah, we'll see. Again, I wonder, I mean, it's going to be a big deal. So the first version 3 Starship, when that launches, and so again, that will definitely impact the Starship schedule. We just don't. We're probably only going to be able to see the next one in line. But if that goes well, I'm trying to remember if. I mean, I'm probably misremembering, but I think there were. I mean, I guess I wouldn't be surprised, for instance, if it goes really well, like if you have the same, you recover both, well, not you simulate recovery of both stages. Maybe you don't recover the ship, but you catch the booster and you soft land the ship, precise ocean impact, or precise landing. It's just that it's gonna, as they did in the last 2 version 2 flights, that maybe even if they were thinking to do one or the other, like to do another suborbital test on the second V3 flight, maybe they would say, hey, we got enough information, or we got enough data here to try and go for the first orbital mission at that point, because that's the first, or maybe not the first step, but that's the next step. If you're in terms of what Artemis is interested in, is going orbital and then starting to demonstrate some endurance. So even with the orbital, one of the questions is going to be, for that first orbital flight, how many orbits, so what level of endurance can Starship demonstrate, and demonstrate its spacecraft capabilities above and beyond its upper stage capabilities. So can it spend a day, like 24 hours in orbit? Can it spend a couple of days? Can it spend a week in orbit? Those are going to be early. I mean, I'll be kind of curious for the propellant transfer demo, how long they're going to let the target Starship stay in orbit before they launch the chaser to do the transfer itself. But that's going to be something that they're going to need. They won't need it for Artemis III, but they're definitely going to need it for Artemis IV, and so that's going to be an important thing. So if I recall correctly, Peter, thank you for the super chat. Appreciate it. I know that's I know you've been have been a frequent contributor, so I really do appreciate it. I mean, I'm okay with taking a little break, letting my travel budget lick its wounds and recover for a little while. But I am hoping that we're going to get to do that we're going to get to see some more things this year, and certainly next. And so this definitely helps. So, and actually, that's interesting. So, Joker's talking about, so on Artemis 3, if it's an Earth orbit test, you're not going to get a full lunar a re-entry at lunar return speeds. But I'd actually be kind of curious, and if they do this, it'll be quantified to some extent. But on that very first Orion flight test, they went up to an apoapsis, apogee. It was in the thousands of kilometers, but it wasn't even as high as this 24-hour orbit that we just saw on Artemis II. So I wonder if they did a high Earth orbit test on Artemis 3. It certainly wouldn't, again, it would not reach lunar reentry speeds, but it would at least be, it'll be a first test of the new, what would you call it? Cooking process for the Avco blocks with the higher permeability. But yeah, we won't, in theory, we would not see that test until Artemis 4. I guess if you were trying to, justify an alternate mission to what we're now talking about for Artemis 3, even a standalone, one thing you would get out of flying Orion to the moon on its own on Artemis 3 would be to get that lunar reentry. You'd get another lunar reentry test, but you'd now be testing it with this new Avcoat fabrication process, or I'm not even sure how you'd put that, or it's not production, or maybe it is, but yeah, but again, it's sort of is that worth it? Is that enough for it to be worth it? Because you would be expending another SLS vehicle for sure to do that, and is that worth it? It of course depends on, again, where's the lunar landing mission in that sequence. If the lunar landers might be ready for Artemis 4 in 2028, then it's hard not to see. It's still hard not to see it's almost like the lunar landers have to be a part of these missions from now on, and so that's why I wonder. I guess I'd be really curious about the rationale if you went down that road, but I guess I would be surprised. Let's see. So I'm probably gonna have to wrap up here because I got an early flight home tomorrow. But I see Anthony's talking about a multi-pronged fix for the core stage seals. That's interesting, because when I asked about that pre-Artemis II launch, and they were talking about, it was something that they wanted to talk to the SLS program about, and so that'll be an interesting thing to talk about. I wish I had time to ask that question today, but having said that, there's a lot of questions right now, so I hope we get another opportunity to go through this with the program folks here in the next handful of months. And so, yeah, I think that's another one of those big picture questions, which is what for Starship, what are the company's priorities? Because again, now that the company's going public, there's, I think they have to be cognizant of their shareholders and what they're, although having said that, we've seen Elon Musk, basically use his own judgment along a lot of times in terms of Tesla, and they're willing to experience some short-term pain from a quarterly report, for instance, versus in the name of long-term benefit. And we've seen how that has worked out for Tesla in the long haul. There are some I guess close calls several times, but that seems to have worked out. So, but it will be interesting to see whether there are other. It will be interesting to see how high a priority the Artemis and lunar objectives are for Artemis for SpaceX relative to their other goals and priorities for Starship. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think. And then I'll probably wrap up after this, Anthony. So, I don't think. I'm not sure we're ever going to hear about. Well, maybe not. But I don't think we're going to be hearing about a near rectilinear halo orbit for Artemis anytime soon. It may come up for some other reasons, but yeah, I'm not expecting to hear about that orbit very much going forward. So it'll be, it's going to be one of these. It'll probably be, especially if they're going to continue to target the South Pole, it'll probably be a polar orbit of some kind. But I know they're talking about at some point we're going to have to go back to that alternate, the alternate to the Gateway orbit that they were looking at back in 2020. It's an elliptical polar orbit. What is it with coplanar line of apsides, I think is what it's called. I don't know if that's the one that they're talking about now, but the one of the advantages of that was it was an orbit that could be given the opportunity to re-rendezvous from the surface of the moon like every 10 hours or so, versus again the Gateway orbit, the period of that orbit is much longer. Almost a week. And so the orbit, I forget what the orbit is for this. It's on the order of several hours though. So it reduces the amount of time from that orbit. It's a staging orbit still, but it's, and I actually had mixed it up. I was looking at a graphic, the original graphic they'd shown a 4,500 by 100 kilometer polar orbit, but the orbit that they're looking at, I had it backwards, but the orbit that they're looking at, pardon me, is 6,500 kilometers by 100 kilometers. But again, it takes less time to get from that orbit down to low lunar orbit, which is where you begin your descent. And then similarly coming back, it takes less time to get from that staging orbit to the surface and back. So that's but if again, we've also heard some rumors that they're considering the South Pole as optional, perhaps, for an initial lunar landing, again to just accomplish the objective, kind of Apollo 11 style. So we'll see. Again, that maybe they don't do that type of orbit or maybe it's just an elliptical. It's an equatorial orbit, but it's still, again, that type of a profile. So, but we'll have to see. Many things still to talk about. So, but yeah, that's interesting. So I'll have to go. I'll definitely be going through that post-flight update, and it is good. I mean, it's even if that image does not have the full Orion heat shield, it is more than we got after Artemis 1. So certainly more than we got in a much shorter time frame than we got. Again, I think that the first images of the heat shield we got were again in an Inspector General report. It wasn't until the middle of 2024. So this is only a week and a half after landing. So is definitely a good sign in terms of, again, I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily call it full transparency, but it's certainly a lot more open. It's definitely more open than we saw after Artemis 1, and that's definitely appreciated. So, but I'll need to go through that, and hopefully I can. I now need to figure out kind of how to slice and dice a video for this coming weekend. But there's a lot of stuff to catch up on now, including this update here that was just published at the end of the day today. So that's I'll be digesting that. I'm not sure we're going to get a whole lot more about the New Glenn issue for a while. But there's also, again, there's a budget hearing coming up on Wednesday morning. So that's like 36 hours from now. So that'll be interesting to look at, although I don't know how related, how we'll see how directly related to Artemis is, and then indirectly about just the NASA budget in general. So there's a lot of things going on. It's going to be interesting to see how things settle down over the next handful of weeks. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap up for tonight, and do some reading on the plane tomorrow, and then figure out what comes next. But I am going to plan on trying to do something, do a members live stream. Maybe not Wednesday, but maybe Thursday, just depending on when I can kind of get settled back at home and sort of see more of the content here and digest what I saw today and now some of this other news that we're seeing. But again, thanks again to everybody. Thanks for the super chat from Peter again, and I'll see you guys when I am back home. Thanks again for your time.